Today I'm talking about camera settings. In a previous video I talked about using the standard program mode. Get kind of the settings that you want, but with a simple, easy to use setup. You don't have to micromanage settings. When I go to conventions, I'm often using a external flash, and in the convention situations there's a multitude of different lighting conditions. Various hotels, inside the hotels, different sized rooms, different lighting, different types of light, multiple light sources. And you go outside, got large buildings, shadows, daytime, evening, even nighttime photos. So there's a multitude of different conditions to deal with. What I do usually is I have the flash connected. This, for example, is a Sigma 530DG Super PTTL communication. And then I have the camera in FP mode, which means high speed sync. Flip through the settings and then it's in FP. I'm often, or almost all the time, using a diffuser, make the light softer. So what I use is aperture priority mode. In this case, Pentax, it's called AV. You can see on the dial here, there's AV mode. You can also use a custom user setting. This is a K-5 that allows you to use AV with various custom settings. I'll just show you that it's set to AV mode. I have a 40mm f2.8 lens connected at the moment. In one of my previous videos I mentioned using telephoto or short telephoto with a large aperture, and then a wide angle with also maybe f2.8 or so. So I've got the camera in aperture priority, and then I set my aperture. This depends on your subject. So if I'm shooting a single person, I'll tend to use a large aperture value because I want that blurred background. But if I'm shooting a group of people, I'll take that down to maybe 5.6 or f8. And then I also control the ISO value. I do not let the camera do automatic ISO. So in this case, you hold the ISO button down and then you set that with the back scroll wheel. The reason I do this is because I most often use a large ISO, and I don't want that to happen because I don't need extremely high ISO values when I'm using the flash. Let's say I'm outside in the bright sunlight. I'll crank the ISO down to 80. Although if I go inside, I'll pump it up to 800 or 400 or 800. So that allows me to define how bright or dark the background is. So inside there's less light. I let the camera use that higher ISO to kind of equalize the background and the foreground subject that's being lit by primarily the flash. And what I also do is, because I'm using a light modifier on the flash, I take the exposure compensation and I crank it down to either negative 0.3, 0.7, or maybe even up to negative 2, depending on various situations. But I can often leave that a negative value because the modifier softens the light, but up close more of the light it seems more powerful. So you have less range, but with that modifier you have to somehow compensate for the change. So that's what I do, is I use the exposure compensation. So it's a pretty simple setup, and it allows me to not have to deal with the shutter speed because I can go outside and then the camera is in high speed sync. The camera will use a faster shutter speed to deal with that bright light, and I'll just walk inside. The camera will deal with less light. It makes it simple, not having to control everything. I often leave the aperture at a setting because most often I'm taking a photo of a single person, and then with the group photos, that's on occasion, maybe about 30% of the time, I'll change that ISO. So that's all I have to do for that, because I'm already in the place. I would have already changed the ISO to deal with either inside or outside conditions. So I'll just be changing that aperture. And like I said, the shutter speed, the camera will know what's best. I don't often need to control freezing of motion in those situations. If I do specifically want to stop motion, someone's jumping in the air or something, I'll have to switch to a different mode. But with this aperture priority setup, it allows me to go in various areas, various conditions, and only have to deal with a few setting changes. That way I can get a pretty high quality exposure throughout all of those odd situations. So that's about it for this setting video. Thanks.